probably be.
Hey,
Yeah.
welcome to the Teachers Lounge Talk Show. We are here at WHPR TV 33 Studios. We are so excited to be in your living rooms. Just feel good. I just feel good today. I feel wonderful. Before we get started, we have to thank Minister Malik Shabazz and the Get Up Stand Up Show for sharing his platform with the Teachers Lounge every Thursday from 8 to 9 p.m. We also want to thank Mr. David Mohammed and Available Geeks for being the sponsor of the Teachers Lounge Talk Show for the 3 years that we have been here home at WHPR TV 33 Studios. We have to give a shout out, of course, to Facebook. Hey, Facebook. Hey. Listen, buckle your seatbelts, everybody, because we have an exciting show. We have our co-host. How you feeling, Ms. Funk?
I'm feeling good.
Yes.
Ready.
I'm excited. How you feeling, Mr. Gardner?
Feeling good. 5 more days.
I'm not counting at all. Well, I tell you, you can see who we have here. We have Mr. Dr. Nikolai Vitti, DPSCD School Superintendent. Thank you so much, sir, for coming out. We know your schedule is overwhelming, and it takes time to come out and talk with us. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. I look forward to it.
Yes,
Already
sir.
having a good time. We haven't even started.
Yes. So we're just going to dive right into it. Really quick. I'm so excited. I forgot to introduce my host, my wonderful guest. Okay, we have Dr. Nikolai Vitti. All right, Dearborn native, son of immigrants, Italian immigrants at that. This gentleman graduated with a degree from Harvard University. Yes, we have Ivy League in the house. Yes, this gentleman was in Florida, Jacksonville, Florida, with the Duval public school system, the worst school system in Florida, the most dangerous, and now he's here. So that was my intro that I flowed. But, give him a round of applause. Yeah.
All right,
Excellent.
all right, yeah.
Well, let's just get into it. Sir, we started this year finding out that we are the worst in the nation, in these United States, when it comes to testing. Our MSTEP scores were in the toilet. We are the worst. Now, I remember you said in a press conference you gave in the beginning of the year that you were shocked that we didn't have systems. Can you talk more about that, and what systems did you put in place so that we will no longer be the worst school district in this free world?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me.
Yes, sir.
Look forward to the conversation. A lot to talk about. Firstly, I would say test scores can never define a child's talent. I would also say test scores in and of itself also doesn't define a school district, a child, a teacher, or a principal. It should be one measure that should be looked upon to see where a child is or a group of children are. And really tests were at the most positive level were supposed to be used to make sure that we properly intervene in children's academic experience so we can move them to being at grade level, not to penalize children.
Right.
And I think we've forgotten that through all really the politics of education. So I think it's very easy to label a child from a standardized test. I've been negatively labeled, especially when I was young, with standardized testing, and luckily with the right support, I ended up being a better test taker. But I could tell you that if I were judged solely on a standardized test, not only would I have eventually gone to Harvard, but I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you as superintendent, and I think a lot of students can say that. But when we talk about systems, it's just systems for everything. Systems for hiring teachers, systems for professional development, systems linked to curriculum, systems linked to pay, you name it, and we've lacked a system. And so I think, teachers like you, principals, I met with paraprofessionals actually today, a couple hours before coming here, and everyone deserves credit just for sticking with children throughout chaos, under emergency management, trying to do it right by children. And so now it's the time to actually have a school district that's run functionally, normally, so that we can provide the right support for teachers so children can learn at a higher level. So what new systems have we created? Just one, being responsive. I think I hear from teachers often, they say, for the first time, we email the district, at least me, and we get a response. That's a system. We're now recognizing experience outside of Detroit to pay teachers for the experience that they have, even those teachers that have been here and haven't had credentials recognized. So that's a system we created. We've been training all K teachers on the new standards this year in reading and in math, and then we have new curriculum next year. So those are some examples of systems that we've developed, but many more that need to be created, from supporting new teachers that are hired to working with our parents and offering them training. We can go on and on, but that's how normal systems function. But unfortunately, DPS, now DPSCD, has not been functioning normally, and students have suffered, and so have employees over the years because of that.
And when you talk about the systems, what else in your first year as superintendent here has been most shocking? And what do you feel has been the greatest accomplishment? And what do you look forward to further next year?
So what was most shocking to me was the dilapidated facilities. That in 2018, when I started, 2017, that I would walk into buildings and tiles were falling apart, ceilings were falling off, roofs were not repaired, that we have to constantly cancel school because sewage is not working, doors or windows don't open to reduce the temperature when it's hot outside. Those things most districts are not struggling with throughout this country. And there are moments based on the school you're in, the time of day, the temperature, etc., where our children and our employees are facing third world country status. And that is unconscionable when you think of being in the United States, arguably one of the most powerful, richest countries in the world, but we still have second-class citizens. And that was, I knew it, growing up in the area, I know it, but when you actually see it and you walk through it, that was more shocking and disturbing to me. I think what I'm most proud of this year is starting to rebuild morale. I do think that the average employee has a greater sense of hope. And it's not just hope, I think now it's moving into seeing some concrete examples of the district actively supporting teachers, students, parents, and being an advocate for education, really not just taking a step back and reacting. The school district and the central office is functioning well. It's to directly support teachers and students. If people in the district office are not directly supporting teachers and schools, then they really shouldn't be there. And it's trying to change that culture, and we have a lot of work to do that, but I think we're slowly making progress in that direction.
Yeah, I agree. And
Hold on, Carl.
and I've seen a lot of great changes since you've come aboard. I hope the good work continues and morale is going up. My question is, how can teachers get paid for workshops in a timely manner? Because presently, we wait for many months to see those monies, and I think a lot of teachers would attend more professional developments if they knew they get they see it in their paycheck within the next 2 or 3 checks.
I agree. That was a challenge. It's one of those systems issues that we talked about earlier. Like I said, you can name the issue, and there was a system lacking behind it. From the professional development that we've run so far this year that has completed, I think people are seeing payment faster. But there's always room for improvement. But that's a system connected to that. So now we have, I think, better communication between curriculum and instruction and finance, so that when we have the credits that obtained, record of the credits, then finance is processing payment faster. And that's a system and a process. So I think if you look at your experience last year to this year, hopefully it's gotten better, and then as we move into the following year, it gets even better. And I think that's the expectation, is every year, incrementally, we're progressing in a more positive direction, knowing we can't rebuild the district overnight because the district didn't deteriorate overnight. But I think everyone should see positive steps in the right direction, including being paid more rapidly when people complete their professional development.
We want to encourage you to get involved in this conversation. We have Dr. Nikolai Vitti as our special guest here on the Teachers Lounge Talk Show. Our calling numbers are 313-868-0342 or 313-868-0351 or 313-868-4336. We're going to take a call.
Sure.
All right, here we go. Carlos, listen, before we do anything, let me tell you something, right? We're going to be quick. We're going to be most respectful, okay? We're not trying to get anybody. No, we're here to welcome this gentleman, and we're here to learn from him. Okay, let's be respectful, or Ms. Piper will bang on
That's
you.
your
Yes,
teacher
sir.
voice, right?
Yes, sir. Did you see that?
I did.
Yes. Caller, welcome to the Teacher's Lounge. You have a question or comment for Dr. Vitti?
Yes. Peace and greetings to all the teachers and educators.
Thank you.
First thing is that I'd like to thank Dr. Nikolai Vitti for recognizing the systematic curriculum that's within the PPS school system. Secondly, my teacher is my wife is a teacher, and we both thank you for the raise.
Yes.
The question that I do have is how can you build on keeping talented teachers within the district and also pampering and doing whatever is needed to make the teachers that's here stronger in this field?
Excellent question. Thank you so much, caller. Thank you so much. Please, Wayne.
So I think I heard, how do we continue to support teachers to be even better who are here, and how do we recruit teachers to come into the district, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I think we can continue to keep teachers in the district and continue to improve by some of the things that we started this year. More professional development. It was a significant disappointment not to see consistent professional development happening. No matter what profession you take, no matter what education you previously had, you always have to refine your trade. And that happens through professional development. And you become stale, you don't feel challenged, you're not growing, and so teachers are natural thinkers and learners, and they have to be attached to that process. So I think just constantly adding professional development. Obviously, we focus on the standards this year, but that's going to evolve where eventually I can see a menu of options for teachers. So some will be on the curriculum, on the standards, but we have to, in analyzing data and intervening, we have to go beyond that. We should be offering teachers training on things like gifted education, on teaching English language learners, training on multiple intelligences, training on gender-based education. So really thinking about no different than when you're in college and you can say, you know, that class would really be interesting and I would just like to challenge myself to think differently about something. And building that kind of professional development, I think that keeps people hungry, engaged, and curious. Beyond that, I think pay matters. And I've said pay matters from the minute, I remember my first interviews on the first day I started the job, is that we can talk about supporting teachers, but pay matters. I think I've demonstrated an increase in pay every year, continuing to do that. And I eventually want to get to a point where I do believe Detroit teachers should be the highest paid teachers in Michigan. And I think they should be the highest in the nation, and that's not rhetoric. I'm not saying that because I'm running for a campaign. I'm saying that because I believe that the work in Detroit is the hardest work in Michigan and the hardest work in this country. And people need to be paid in a way that reflects that challenge and that need. I also think we have to do a better job of reducing class size. And that comes with filling teacher vacancies to be fully staffed. And that's really not a budget issue, that's a recruiting issue. And I think by recognizing experience outside of Detroit, we'll be better positioned to do that. I want to add more paraprofessionals to the K-2 level to help with that work. I also want to put more academic interventionists in classrooms to work with students in smaller groups, because it's hard for one teacher to work with 25 students at once when 18 might be below grade level. So those are, and an important point is principals. Principals have to be stronger instructional leaders. They have to be better at creating the right climate and culture in schools. And that's giving voice to teachers, constantly asking teachers what's working, what's not, what do we need to do differently, what do you think we should do, and how do I support you to do that? And teachers watching one another teach, more support. That's why we have the master teachers this year to provide that direct support to teachers, especially our new teachers. The only thing that I haven't said about bringing in new teachers is I want to rebuild residency programs for teachers. You know, if a surgeon learns to conduct surgery before actually conducting surgery by watching master doctors and surgeons before they actually do it as a profession, we need to do the same thing with teachers. Teachers need to learn through master teachers how to teach before they're the teacher of record. And so we are going to start to build residency programs where you learn how to teach before you're the teacher of record. And I think that creates a pipeline, putting more student teachers in a classroom to learn how to teach before there's a teacher of record in Detroit. We've lost a lot of our partnerships with universities that we're starting to rebuild. So said a lot, but those are some ideas as we move forward.
Those all sound really great.
Yeah,
I'm excited just hearing them.
Yeah, I can't wait for next year.
So when you talk a lot about slow improvement and getting there and ideas of big picture, what can we look forward to this coming fall or this coming year in terms of short-term improvements?
Mm-hmm.
What is on your short list? What is that going to look like, and what do you think are going to be the biggest challenges looking into that?
So I think one short-term win has to be to continue to reduce vacancies. So last year we carried about 275 vacancies. We started the year with only 160. We're now up to 200. But we also added 250 more classrooms with the EAA schools returning. So apples to apples, we're doing a better job, but I want to get down to only a couple dozen vacancies by the beginning of the year. We for the first time since 2002, we had an increase in enrollment. I'd like to see enrollment continue to increase. In addition to that, I'm hoping by the end of next year to see more leaders develop. So we have a longer bench of individuals that are ready to become principals and assistant principals, more teachers that are willing to be master teachers. I'd like to see fewer suspensions. I'd like to see our attendance rate improve with our students. And then I think at the end of next year, especially at the 3rd grade to 8th grade level, we should start to see student achievement improve. I think more students should be at grade level in reading and math because of the new curriculum. I don't think we're going to go 0 to 100, immediately, but we should start to see every school improve 3 percentage points and then build on that year after year. So those would be some short-term wins in the short term.
And you mentioned attendance a bit ago. Now, it's warm, it's hot, and not in our school, but I know a lot of this school, the kids have stopped coming. It's too hot. What can we do to alleviate that? What can schools do? Is something to make these kids want to come to school more?
Well, I had asked you before we went on air about your school.
That's a segue.
And that's a good maybe a new profession after I retire.
Yes.
But you were telling me about things that you were doing at Flicks, so I think this is a good opportunity for you to tell the audience what you're doing.
Marlena, please.
So today we had our culture festival. We had performances in all 4 languages and cultures, grades K to 8. And the whole afternoon was a way to celebrate our school and everything the kids have accomplished all year. Then next week we've got the 8th grade basketball tournament. Creating fun experiences. This is the time of year kids have been testing for 2 months straight. Some of them nonstop, multiple hours a day. They've been working really hard, and now is a chance to celebrate that and to create experiences they want to come to school for.
And I know my daughter is a new DPSCD student. She goes to Flicks as well. And this is her first culture blast. So of course I was like, how did you enjoy it? And she lit up. Oh, I loved it. It was so much fun. What was your favorite part? The food. So it was just wonderful as a parent to see my child light up with glee over school. So it works, having programs towards the end of the year that the kids want to participate in. So I just wanted to add
that. We had a great program today in my school as well. We had a parent culminating event. I'm the site coordinator for the 21st Century program, and today the parents got to come in and the kids got to show off what they were doing in kitchen science. So they were able to produce an edible science experiment for the children. Then after that, we wrapped it up in a media production room where the kids were making a film, a short film, during their their stay in the 21st Century After School program. So the parents got to see their little short film, and
wow.
it had the music behind it. It was
that's so
edited.
cool.
It was really cool. So yeah, we had a wonderful event at our school as well.
See, there are lots of wonderful things going on at DPSCD schools. Yes, we got another caller. Want to take?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Caller, welcome to the Teachers Lounge. You have a question or comment for Dr. Vitti?
Yes, welcome Teachers Lounge and welcome Dr. Vitti.
Thank you.
First of all, I really need to laud you, sir. I think you're going to do a great job. I like your attitude and your aggressiveness about going about things with BPS. So thank you for that in advance. But I do need to ask you, is it possible for you to do anything to retrofit some of these schools? We have some of the oldest schools probably in the world here where our kids are still going. And it's like one of the former teachers said, it's hot sometimes in these rooms. We got like 90 coming up again on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
What about the VTS school system getting some money for air conditioners in each room? I mean, I know the buildings are old and you may not be able to put a central air system in, but something needs to be done in terms of the heat and also the cold in the wintertime. These schools are old, and I happen to know the windows are old. Some of them don't open up well, and if you do open them up, you got insects and birds flying in there and all that kind of stuff. So what could be done, immediately to alleviate this for the fall or even the summer? Because some kids got to go to summer school.
Excellent question. Thank you so much, caller. Excellent question.
Yeah, so I'm often asked, what are the greatest challenges that we face? I would say one of the greatest challenges that we face short-term and long-term is the state of our facilities. And there's no quick solutions to the challenge. Obviously, it's an infusion of revenue just to deal with the facility issue, but there's nothing in sight regarding that as an opportunity. Very quickly, when we went from DPS to DPSCD, lots of people will try to remind people in a negative way to say, well, your debt was forgiven. Our debt was never forgiven.
Right.
We're paying off the debt until probably 2040, 2050. And to pay off that debt, we're taking local property tax revenue to pay off that legacy debt, which, by the way, was created by mainly emergency management. With that said, most school districts use that local revenue for capital improvements. We received $25 million from DPS to DPSCD transition for maintenance expenses. We're going to spend that very quickly as we redo some roofs and just do minor repairs. At the end of this month, we'll have a facility review done, which will tell us how much it would cost to upgrade every individual school to 2021 standards, and that includes active air conditioning in every school and heating. And so we're not going to have immediate dollars to solve that problem or to fill that gap, but at least we'll have the information to begin a public conversation about the problem. As I always say, if you don't define the problem, you can never identify the solution. And this is a third-party review. We'll have good data, and then we can start talking about this. And I will say, we have to vote. And so pay attention to who is actively and positively supporting K-12 public education, because the next governor is going to play a significant role in the future of DPSCD. So pay attention, do your homework, and actually vote, because this issue I don't believe can be solved unless we have a sympathetic governor in the office.
Speaking of politics, do you support Mayor Duggan's unified bus system, even if buses picks up charter school students?
So when the proposal initially came, I was interested in it because I thought it was a way to provide parents with an easier access to school and access to after-school programming. My initial hesitation to support it was that there would be a flat rate for all schools. Originally, we were told $20,000 for all of the schools that participate, at least in that area, 6, and then it went to $20,000 per school. And when we analyzed the situation, it would mean a subsidy to charter schools, which I was unwilling to do. The mayor responded to that criticism and we negotiated an agreement that we would only pay per rider. So now we only pay a fee if a student rides the bus to and from school. We pay $1,000 per student. If they only take the bus to go to the after-school programming, then it's only $500. That's not subsidizing charter schools because we're only paying for our students. We're going to analyze the impact of this in 1 year. We agreed to do it for a year, and if we see more students coming to our 6 schools, including Flicks, by the way,
Yes.
then we'll support it. But if we see that we're losing students from it, or we're not seeing much of an impact, then we won't support it in year 2. But we ultimately supported it because if we can find a way for our students to get to school easier, safer, and have after-school support, then why not? Even if it's a bus loop that includes charter schools, as long as we're not paying for it. And we're only paying for the kids that ride our bus to go to our schools.
I am curious about something, sir. Since we're talking about schools, Palmer Park.
Yes.
We did receive an email from a community resident. I live in the University District. And they are really curious about your plans for Palmer Park. So can you talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind?
Sure. So most people probably know that our students at Palmer Park right now are at DIA, our all-girls school, K-12. And they're there because of the water leakages that were coming from the roof that should have been repaired a while ago. But the board has approved, the FRC has approved the installment of a new roof. So that is starting now. That work has already started. It'll be done by the beginning of the school year, and the students will move back to Palmer Park with a new roof, and then we're going to beautify the school with the limited dollars that we have inside. Not massive repair, but so it looks different, and there's an entire wing of that building that has not been used for middle school students that is also going to be renovated. And so our plan is to eventually create a full Montessori program at Palmer Park. So right now we have pre-K students that are involved every year. They'll sequence upwards, and eventually that'll be a full Montessori school. And we believe that that school should be at full capacity with a Montessori program.
So that'll be similar to Spain, also has Montessori?
That's right. Spain also will build out a Montessori program, but it'll maintain the performing arts focus as well.
Wow.
We have another caller. Ready?
Yes.
All right. Caller, welcome to the Teachers Lounge. We are here with Dr. Nikolai Vitti, DPSCD Superintendent. Do you have a question or comment?
Yes, a question and or a comment. Could it be possible that there could be these large businesses adopt a school so that, different schools could get things done? Since Dr. Vitti has already alluded to not having enough funds to do retrofitting and things like that for the school, perhaps a more aggressive adopt a school program. After all, the city of Detroit certainly has buckled up a lot of the large billionaires, i.e. Diane Gilbert and the like. I'd like to see some of them give something back, like the Fords and the millionaires here, the billionaires here around the area. So, maybe adopt some schools, and also people who are alumni from these schools. We got so many people who have benefited from the Detroit public school system, and perhaps, that would be a route too. Getting some money to do something to make the schools safer and a bit more up to date, so that they won't have all these days in school with the hot days and the cold days and the leaking roofs, and also the water fountains that the kids can't drink out of, all that kind of thing.
Excellent. Caller, you were on the money. Thank you, caller.
So I think that's a great idea. It's something that we've begun to have conversation with the city, but also some private companies as well. At the end of the day, and I've said this many times, as the city sees new investment in stadiums, housing complexes, and even neighborhoods being revitalized, this city will never reach the potential that it has and not be completely rebuilt unless it has a strong traditional public school system. That's just common sense, because individuals will not move back to Detroit, they won't stay in Detroit. It will not be a strong, vibrant city again unless people feel comfortable with sending their children to traditional public schools. You can say that about any city throughout the country. And so I believe that as we see some of this investment, and we're seeing this investment in businesses and neighborhoods, there has to be a shift of resources to schools. And so the vision, people say, well, what's your vision 5-10 years from now? My vision is that children have no hesitation, that parents have no hesitation to send their child to the neighborhood school. That is where I think we talk about public education being at the highest level and the city being at its greatest strength, is when a family moves into a house, has children, and says, that's the school my child is going to go to down the street, down the block. That is what once existed in the city, linked to DPS, and obviously that deteriorated. But if we're going to talk about a vision and what that looks like, it's going to knowing you're going to go to this K-8, this middle school, this high school, and there's really no conversation, because that's what you're going to do, because all the schools offer a solid education and solid programming. But we're going to have to rebuild our facilities to make that happen. And I do believe that the private sector has a role to play in that, because it's a win-win. It also means employees then live in the city. And it's a win-win across the board. So that's the only way I think we'll eventually get there, because I don't see it coming from Lansing. And we're only limited to taxation to a certain extent moving into the future. And we cannot obtain any debt based on the rules of the debt forgiveness.
You talk a lot about public schools, and I'm hearing that a lot of traditional public school system. And I know you have your work cut out for you in the state of Michigan, where Betsy DeVos is from and her family runs that. How can we continue to advocate? If your vision is a traditional public
Right.
school system that's powerful, we have a lot to fight against. Is that possible? How is that possible?
It's
Hate to be negative.
No. And it's realistic. It's
Yeah.
realistic, and I think that's part of the realistic challenge. I think you're just speaking truth to why. I mean, let's be honest. This is why we're here. We're here because there were not the right guardrails were not created when choice was ushered into Michigan and into the city of Detroit. And so we saw a public school system run by emergency managers who were not educators. They had no experience in education. So you put the school system at a huge disadvantage because it wasn't led properly. Then you ushered in choice. Parents felt vulnerable. They weren't necessarily comfortable with the education that their children were getting. And then you said it's greener on the other side. Charter schools, choice to other districts. And that created the perfect storm to destabilize the traditional public school system. And so some can say it was by chance, and some people would say it was actually intentional. And I think there are signs that it was intentional. But in the end, we overcome that by voting. We overcome that by showing that traditional public education is stronger than charter school education. And that's part of being competitive again. That's not laying down, accepting how the conditions exist, but saying, this is who we are, this is the education we provide. If you doubt us, come to our school, visit our school, walk the classrooms. And then we have to just create a word of mouth of energy, a positive energy, especially with our employees, to say, this is where you should put your child. And we all own that collectively. And I think that over time, we have been here, we are going to be here, and we are what is sustainable and consistent. I don't think charter schools can make that same argument. Now, there are good charter schools out there, I'm not going to say that. But for every good charter school, there's a good traditional public school. And that's the kind of story we need to tell. And we have to be actively competitive, and everyone has to own that level of competition.
We did have a question from one of our DFT brothers who asked, is it possible that each school can have a building sub for next year? Because a lot of teachers are losing their preps. Is that possible?
Yeah, that's something that I did previously in other districts that I ran. I think the greatest opportunity to reduce the loss of preps is to be fully staffed. I think that's one way to do it. I also believe that we should have common planning and more time for teachers to plan together. I think that happens at schools, but being more consistent. There's nothing that would prevent us from having a full-time sub at every school, other than the fact that it's hard to find subs.
Okay.
And that's the issue. But I think that could easily be done. we would just have to create consistency with who our subs are. No different than trying to fill teacher vacancies, it's also trying to fill sub vacancies.
Well, we're going to have to take a quick break. Don't touch that dial. We're here live with Superintendent of DPSCD, Nikolai Vitti. We'll be right back.
See you soon. Don't go nowhere. Yes. We're still on. Hey, don't go anywhere. We'll be back.
That's called dead air. You gotta avoid dead air.
Up for a second. You almost got me crying.
Wait,
Okay, we're gonna switch out.
I was thinking, it looks better if you take my seat. I have two ladies here, the two gentlemen here.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm positive. It just looks better.
Sure.
Yeah, it looks better. Yeah, you sit there. Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
No, I'm thinking no here. Two beautiful ladies. It just looks better.
What thing you want us to bring up?
That's funny. That's funny. Only you
I
will.
want to get to the racism issue because that ties into how we.
Okay. Okay. So,
That was pretty profound.
okay. So, if we could go into teacher evaluations and making sure that teachers don't fall prey to principals with chalk. Not that they have any. You know what I mean? We want to talk a little bit about your there's an article on Chalkbeat, and I believe it's from the Mackinac Conference.
Yeah.
When you pretty much put it on the line and said there's racism here.
Of course.
And I would love for you to talk about that because, you know, people like to stick their heads in the sand on that. What makes you most proud of DPS schools? What makes you most concerned? We talked about Duggan, Palmer Park, we talked about expectations for next year.
We talked about that.
Okay.
So I think the racism and the toxic stress.
Okay. Okay.
But
Did the thing.
I just think the racism,
matter.
I didn't really understand how it all related to racism until I lived here. And it's just, I mean, you hear it, but to really be able to speak to it, I think a lot of people.
What do you talk a little bit more about the same testing? You talked about before the break. You were saying that with all these out testing.
Yeah.
And, you know, you want to talk about maybe the process that you
Okay.
It's not like that. This is crazy.
Okay.
This is crazy.
So,
We
what
have
do you
work
want
to
to
do
start?
there.
So we're going to come in.
One of the problems is
Teacher
who
evaluations.
elected them?
Fair teacher
Okay.
evaluations.
Who supported them? Who encouraged people to
Hey, welcome back to the Teachers Lounge Talk Show. As you see, we switched out. Brother Gardner has taken a break, and we have Mr. Weir. How are you, sir?
Pretty good. It was our team with tie score when I left, so it was hard to break away from it. But I find out how the game went.
Amen. Amen.
Glad
to
you
that.
came here with us.
Yes. Well, we're going to keep the conversation rolling, and of course, we invite you, audience, viewers, please call in your questions and concerns. We have Dr. Nikolai Vitti here. Our number, 313-868-0342 or 313-868-0351. Our last calling number is 313-868-4336. So I want to talk to you a little bit about teacher evaluations, something we all have to go through. It stresses me out. I just don't like it, but I understand the purpose of it. There is a concern that some teachers may fall prey to principals that have vendettas. Not that any DPSC principal would, but how could we alleviate that?
So, the evaluation is stressful for everyone, no matter who you are. And the way you alleviate, I think, the stress is by being upfront with what are the expectations. I think I have not changed anything regarding the process or the tool. I think there's an opportunity to revisit the tool and the process and do it with teachers and administrators at the same time. But I think one thing that we have to do a better job of is working together as administration and teachers on what is the right tool, what is the right process. You can't get every teacher to participate, you can't get every principal to participate, but more collaboration on the tool and the process. And then you actually actively train everybody on it. So everyone knows this is the tool, this is the other expectation, this is how you are rated highly effective, this is what needs improvement and unsatisfactory actually looks like, and everyone is understanding what are the expectations going in to the evaluation process. And then it's implemented with fidelity, and you have individuals that can review questions that are asked, that they can challenge. They have a person to go to if it's something needs to be challenged or better understood. But I think that's the opportunity moving forward, being collaborative, deeply trained, and then expect people to implement with fidelity. But as a former principal, also as a former teacher, I found that the process works when you are upfront with your expectations. And if you are constantly communicating about what's working, what's not, what needs to improve, then when you sit down in that evaluation, you're not shocked, you're not surprised, because you were told up front what the expectation is. And I think it can't be a compliance tool. It can't be, I gotta quickly do this. It has to be something that's actually used to build up teachers, not down. There has to be accountability. I don't think anyone wants a system that doesn't have evaluations. But at the same time, everyone's on the same page with what the expectations are.
So hearing, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Just
Hold on, Carlos.
with a little pushback with that is that I had a class that I had to take over, and when you add up the absences, 614 absences in one class with 35 kids. I teach in 48205, which any teacher teach there. That is a very challenging district, and I don't see the evaluations of being tailored like that. When you have that many absences, and of course when you spoke on the racism, I was very happy. And unfortunately, when you talk about racism, you have some social challenges there. So I don't see the teachers. I don't see how that one evaluation system. I just don't see how it balances out, how it's level. You can't have that many absences. You can't have that many behavior problems, and then give a teacher, say maybe it flips. And in 48205 where I am, the same evaluation. That's just, it's unbalanced. It's not going to balance out. It's
Not only zip codes, but
grossly
ages.
unfortunate. Well,
Teaching
not so much
kindergarten is so
ages.
different than teaching high school.
Well, I've taught every grade from 2nd grade to 8th grade. And until I got over to 48205, and I have to admit, I had 22 years, I have never seen anything like that in my life. Dynamic principals, dynamic teachers, but with those high absentees and the number of exclusions and that we have to do just to be fair to the other kids. I just don't see, the evaluation system being balanced with those type of challenges.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I would say that there's a way to deal with the data component of the evaluation to deal with those kind of issues. When you have excessive absenteeism, I mean, there's a way to pull out certain data with students that have not been there. I don't believe any teacher should be held accountable when a child is repeatedly absent from a class from a student achievement point of view. I think, though, when you look at the practice in the classroom, that's what could be the focus. Yes, when kids are in and out and disruptive, that does interfere with the delivery of instruction. But there's a way to also balance that out with just how you create rapport with your students and the expectation. I think the differentiation needs to come more on the data point, on the student achievement point, but the practice should be rather, I wouldn't say standard, but there should be a standard level of expectation around the delivery of instruction and the way the classroom is managed, but there needs to be differentiation with the data. And I don't know if you agree with that, but that's, some level of standardization I think is important regardless of what zip code we're in or what school, but I think the data has to be differentiated.
I'm curious, Mr. Ware, what if your school adopted some of the programs we have? Like at the end of the year, have a big old basketball tournament, faculty versus students, and a big old play, something that make those kids want to come to school. You think that would work?
Well, those things do work. I guess when I look at the different socioeconomic areas in the city, I think that we push for community schools. And I think the community schools approach is very, very good. They need to tailor the instruction to the students that we're serving. And that is not going to look the same across the board. Just real quick, I had a class where I was teaching math, and I didn't do the pacing chart, but I taught them math. The behavior problems were lessening. The kids were feeling great. The papers were on the board. They were saying, oh, this is great. We're doing good. They felt good about themselves. Then I had somebody come from the district and say, oh, this looks nice. And they found out that I was about 4 chapters or behind. And they really pressed me on it. And I thought, well, what about the kids learning and not so much the pacing chart? As soon as I was forced to catch up with the pacing chart, the behavior problems went up. You know, the fights went up, the behavior problems went up. Their enthusiasm to come into class, the fun that they were having, that just, it vanished. And, you know, being a former police officer, we keep losing our kids. I know what happens when kids don't, you know, have an education. I've seen it. And to me right now, it's like a crisis. You know, it's a crisis. We're just losing a whole bunch of kids, and it scares me. It really does.
I agree, and you
I've seen a lot, I know.
But I think eventually, when we think about rebuilding the district, it's also realizing that you can't take a one-size-fits-all approach.
Sure.
You know, the issues at Fisher Upper and Lower are different than the issues at Flicks. So when you're thinking about where a full-service school should go, you think about your school. When you think about mental health support, you think about your school, dental support, medical support.
Exactly.
When you think about not just one dean of discipline, but maybe 2 deans of discipline would be at your school. And that's where we have to start. I think you need to create an equitable distribution of resources, but then equal is not the same as equity.
Right,
2 different
exactly.
things.
Exactly.
And so I think that's when this year is about trying to create an equal distribution of resources. But then after this year, I think we can start differentiating on that to say it's time for you to have, like I said, 2 to 3 deans. Maybe your class size needs to be 15, where Flicks is at 25. You know, I mean, that's where you really start to become nuanced and differentiated based on the need of the school, which means you're talking about the need of the child. And that's what we haven't done because we haven't worked strategically.
I'm glad to hear you say that because I want us to change the narrative that they're failing schools.
Absolutely.
But they're failing support system.
Right.
Because our kids, as challenging as 48205 is, they're brilliant kids. They are not being taught
Well, and I would
the way
say,
they learn.
not just differentiating education, but I think differentiating accountability. I'm sure
Right.
you understand, like, for me it's so frustrating. I teach Spanish, so I'm no longer held to a standardized test, but it's so heartbreaking to see these kids who are so capable held to a multiple choice test. When their education's differentiated all year, their test is not. My kids have been testing, some of them, since after spring break, and they're still testing. How can you expect them to do well when they've been testing nonstop for 2 months? How can we cut that down, and how can we have tests actually reflect learning? Because I think there's a difference between learning and learning how to take a test.
Absolutely.
And I think if we're expected to differentiate instruction, student achievement needs to reflect that. And it's currently not, and they're losing 2 months of education out of 8 just to take tests.
Yeah, we hopefully most people saw we did cut testing this year based on the district testing. I couldn't eliminate NWEA because we didn't have an alternative, and I think moving into next year, iReady is a stronger alternative only because it is more about where the child is. And so people may or may not know, NWEA always gave everyone false data because it compares, if all 4 of us are students and I take my test, it doesn't really show the growth that I made individually. It shows my growth versus everybody else, which is a convoluted way of even thinking about using a test to help an individual child. So iReady is more based on the individual child. It tells you where that child stands versus other children the same grade level, but it gives you growth based on the child, not as a reflection of other. So I think it's more actionable too, because it's directly linked to the deficiencies that the child has in literacy and math, and not something broader. And then everything else is going to continue to be eliminated unless the course ends with a state assessment, which is certain grade levels in science and social. That's it. That's the only testing that we're doing at the district level. Would be I-ready 3 times based on the individual child, and then assessments for those grade levels that end in a state assessment.
So
I think
I replace math?
yes.
Okay.
It will.
Mhm.
Yeah, at K through 8 in literacy and math next year. But your point about the assessment, I believe, when we're thinking about what's the ideal assessment, I think the ideal assessment is our essays. I think, or oral presentations, or projects that are rigorous. I'm not talking about something you put together in a day, but those are true examples of performance-based, because answering a question in a multiple choice form has nothing to do that anyone will ever do in real life.
That's right.
You might have to take a test to get to college, to get to graduate school, maybe to law school, medical school, but you never apply that. You never take a multiple choice test to decide whether a patient needs to have open heart surgery or a transplant. There's no multiple choice. It's thinking. It's critical thinking, and that can be better reflected in an essay, in an oral exam. And this is where I think Europe does certain things better than we do in this regard, and not a standardized test. So that's where eventually I would like to go when you're thinking about evaluation.
I know in New York there's a district that does portfolios
Correct.
instead of assessments.
Right.
I've heard about that.
Right.
Well, 2 quick
Yeah.
things. I have been going up to Lansing, I guess for about 18 years, helping write social studies questions for the state. This last time I was up there, I wrote questions for my access. And it came to mind that when I got to my classroom, when I taught, I tried to tailor my questions to my students the same way I wrote them for my access. And I think that would be a good way to deliver instruction, to find out what our kids really know. Because when you speak to them on their level, and I'm not saying dumbing down things, because they gave some very brilliant answers, but it was in the language. If we say that they're reading 2 grades below grade level, then we could still teach them with rigor, but at the grade level with which they're reading and writing. And quickly, the second thing, would you be adverse to teacher and community evaluations? I mean, not just survey monkeys. I'm talking about where the teachers' evaluation and the community evaluations of the school and their leadership would hold just as much weight as these evaluations that they're doing with us.
Yeah, interesting you say that, because when I first started as administrator, I believed in this concept of 360 degrees of accountability. So I just believe that, and I don't think if teachers and students and parents don't have a say in the evaluation process, then they don't really own it. They see it as abstract. They're not a part of it, and it's imposed on them. So this is why we started the surveys this year, and it's just a baseline to understand how teachers, how they perceive their learning environment, how they perceive their leader, how students perceive the school. We had about, I want to say 30% of parents that took the survey, so it's a start. But I think over time, once our participation rates increase, especially for parents, I'd be more than willing to include that in the evaluation. Now, I will already start to use that data to get a sense of where a school is. So if student achievement is not progressing, if attendance doesn't improve, if enrollment is declining, if we can't fill vacancies, and the surveys are moving in the wrong direction, those are all indicators that something's wrong at the school. So do we have the right leader? Do we have the right programs? So this is going to be one of the ways that I'm going to look at just the cultural health of a school.
I have to ask you, sir, article in Chalkbeat newspaper, you discussed how equity and racism affect our students. So I'm so glad that you've said that. Can you talk more about that? Can you elaborate on that point, how racism systematic racism has really, really affected our children?
Well, in the conversation at Mackinac, which I didn't know the questions in advance, I knew that Rochelle Riley had written an article previously about racism in general. So I knew we would talk about race, and this country is petrified to talk about race.
Yeah.
Only people that deal with race every day actually talk about race. It's a privilege not to think and talk about race. Unfortunately, a lot of our leaders are those that don't deal with race, so therefore they don't talk about race. And then they lead with an ignorance about race. And so, in this conversation at Mackinac, the question was raised, and my point was that in seeing how the system has been run over a decade through emergency management, that what has happened in Detroit would never have happened in a predominantly white suburban district. And that alone is an example of racism. That you can justify some way or another that children should be exposed to an inferior education. One that isn't funded appropriately to differentiate based on the needs of children. That's a socioeconomic issue, but it's also inherently a race conversation, because we can't ignore, and we shouldn't ignore, that the vast majority of our children are African American, Hispanic, Latino, and again, those demographics allow for the second-class citizenship approach to be taken under emergency management, and that was the context of the conversation. And I think it's my responsibility when given the opportunity to hold people accountable in Lansing, across the nation, and to say that. And I even said it afterwards. People said, "I'm so glad you said that." And I said, "Look, if you actually listen to people, if you know what people are saying, people have been saying this for years. People say this all the time. But did I say anything differently than people feel and think in Detroit? No. I just had a certain platform to say what I said, and I said it. But I feel that what I said was no different than teachers, what they have been saying. I think it's no different than what parents have been saying. And frankly, I'll say it's no different than what kids have been saying in Detroit for years. They sometimes don't know how to articulate it. They don't often say it like people in power, but that's how they feel and think. And I just had an opportunity to say it because of the privilege that I have as being superintendent and being a non-white man.
Well, with 1 minute left, I have to, probably everybody sitting up here, we will agree, it's very encouraging, because everybody's been saying it, but we never had anybody in leadership. So.
Thank you. And I said a non-white man. A white man, people get confused about what I am sometimes. I've learned that people will perceive you one way or the other. Some people look at me as white. Some people look at me non-white. You can look at me any way you want, but because of my education and my position, and for many people being white, there is a point of privilege that I have that other people don't. But it's my responsibility to use that to give voice to those that do not have the opportunity to make that claim. And that's what I did in Mackinac.
Excellent. We got this sign. It's time for us to go. We had a wonderful time with Dr. Vitti. Dr. Vitti, you have to come back.
I will.
Please. In fact, once a year. Let's say next June, you come back.
I'm here.
We can continue the conversation.
I'll come back sooner than that.
Yay! Yes! We are so excited. We are so excited. Thank you so much for watching the Teacher Center. We'll be back next week with our final show of the year. Yes. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. Next week, 8 o'clock. Yes! Dr. Vitti in the house. Yes.
That's good.